Delia Marsh was 36 years old the evening she decided to surprise her husband at work and found out, in the space of about 40 seconds, that she had been the only one in their marriage who was not in on the secret. She drove a 6-year-old Subaru the color of dry moss. She wore her hair natural and her work clothes sensible. A civil engineer did not dress for the approval of people who had never looked at a load table. She packed a dinner in a paper bag that Tuesday. Salmon and rice and 2 portions because she was thoughtful that way, or had been, and she signed in at the front desk of the office building where her husband, Carter Marsh, worked as director of acquisitions for a commercial real estate firm, and smiled at the security guard she had met twice before and took the elevator to the 14th floor, and walked down the corridor to the suite with his name on a placard beside the door. The door was not closed all the way. She pushed it open 6 inches. She did not push it any further. She stood in that hallway for 23 seconds. She counted. She had always been a counter. It was the engineering in her, the need to measure what she was experiencing rather than simply drown in it. Then she turned around and took the elevator back down and thanked the security guard and drove home and sat in the driveway for 11 minutes, with the engine off and the paper bag of dinner still warm on the passenger seat. Carter did not know what she had seen. He also did not know that Delia's mother had died the prior spring and left her in a will that had been in revision for 6 quiet years. A corporate real estate portfolio that included 11 commercial properties across 4 states, 2 of which were currently under lease to Carter's firm. The firm where his boss, a woman named Vivian Cross, had built her career on a foundation Delia had recently learned she had the power to alter completely. What happened in the 14 weeks after that Tuesday would cost Carter Marsh the job, the marriage, and the version of himself he had been carefully performing for 9 years. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The mornings had always been Delia's best hours. She woke before Carter, before the light fully arrived, and she made her coffee in the kitchen of their Cincinnati townhouse and stood at the window above the sink looking out at the small garden she had built herself from a bed of hard clay 3 springs ago. She had laid the raised beds from cedar planks she measured and cut herself on a Saturday in April, working alone because Carter had a golf commitment that day and every Saturday that followed for reasons that had gradually stopped requiring specific explanations. The garden produced green beans and tomatoes and a row of herbs she used most evenings, and she tended it with the same methodical attention she applied to everything in her professional life: soil composition, drainage, the patient correction of what was not yet right. Her mother, Iris Caldwell, had taught her to build things before she taught her anything else. Iris had been a commercial real estate developer who operated primarily in the Mid-Atlantic region for 4 decades and who had conducted her business with a quietness that she described to Delia once as protective coloration. "People assume about you from the surface," she had said. "Let them. The surface is just the first coat. It's not where the work is." She had said this while reviewing a lease document at her kitchen table, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, speaking the way she spoke about everything important, casually, as though the weight of the statement did not require ceremony to be received. Iris Caldwell had died in March at 73, unexpectedly, of a cardiac event that her physicians had not anticipated because she had not given them sufficient information about her family history. A characteristic oversight in a woman who preferred to give people only what they needed and nothing surplus. She had been building for 40 years, and had still been building when she stopped. She had left Delia the portfolio, 11 commercial properties, all performing, all under long-term leases, all managed by a property firm Iris had worked with for 19 years. She had left Delia, also, her reading glasses, her kitchen table, a collection of annotated lease documents organized by property address and renewal date, and a handwritten note that read simply, "You already know what to do. Trust the math." Delia had read that note 4 times on the day she found it, and had put it in a small frame on her desk at the office, where she could see it every morning and every evening on the way out. Carter had attended the funeral and been appropriate throughout. He had expressed condolences to Iris's friends. He had carried things when asked. He had made conversation at the repast with the practiced ease of a man who understood how to move through social situations requiring visible grief without necessarily experiencing it. He had not asked about the will except once, obliquely, the week after the funeral, a question about whether there was a financial advisor involved that Delia had answered with a brevity she did not explain. She had a habit of answering precisely the question she was asked, and nothing adjacent to it. Carter had not asked a second question. She had noted this. She had met Carter 9 years ago at a professional conference in Columbus. He was in commercial real estate acquisition, and she was presenting on structural site assessment, adjacent industries, overlapping enough for conversation. He was engaging then, and genuinely interested, or had seemed so. He remembered details she mentioned once. He asked follow-up questions. He had a way of giving a room his full attention that made the person he was talking to feel like the most considered thing in it. And she had found that quality both appealing and, over time, informative about what he was like when he was not giving it to her. They had dated for 2 years before marrying. The first 4 years of the marriage had been largely good, or good enough that the parts that were not had passed below the threshold she was actively checking. The thing she had dismissed earliest, and then for the longest time, was Carter's habit of talking about his boss with a warmth that was slightly more than professional necessity required. Vivian Cross. He mentioned her often. He used her first name always, not unusual in itself, but the way he used it had a particular frequency. Slightly elevated, slightly careful. The way a person says a word they have been turning over in their own mind before releasing it into a room. She had noted it the way she noted a hairline crack in a wall during a site walk. Not a problem yet. A thing to track. A place where the structure was telling you something about itself if you were paying the right kind of attention. The Tuesday of the dinner bag, she had gone because he had texted at 5:15 that he was working late and would not be home before 9, and she had felt, with a clarity she could not entirely justify, that she did not want to let that information simply settle without verification. She was not prone to suspicion as a character trait. She was prone to accuracy. Those were different things. And accuracy had been telling her, in the quiet accumulative way of things that are true before they are visible, to drive to the building. The 40 seconds at the door told her what accuracy had already suspected. She stood in the hallway, and she counted the seconds not as a coping strategy, but as a structural reflex, measuring what was happening rather than dissolving into it, the way a good engineer takes the reading on the gauge before deciding what the reading means. She did not cry until Thursday, not from stoicism exactly, but because from Tuesday to Thursday she was occupied in the way that a person is occupied when they have decided to be useful rather than undone. Grief and anger were both real, and she would get to them. First, she needed the record to be accurate. On Wednesday evening, before she called Phyllis, she sat at her desk at home with her laptop and opened the camera's cloud storage. The platform her installer had set up retained 90 days of footage organized by date and timestamp. She started from 6 weeks back and moved forward through the daytime hours, fast-forwarding through the empty stretches, the mail carrier, the neighbor's dog, a delivery she remembered receiving, until she found the first anomaly. A silver sedan, newer, with a parking plate she noted in the way she noted license numbers on equipment deliveries, automatically, without having to remind herself. The car was in front of the house for 1 hour and 40 minutes on a Tuesday in late September. She had been in a site meeting that day. Carter had texted her at noon to say he was eating at his desk. She found 5 more instances in the archive. 6 total, spread across 9 weeks, all during daytime hours on days when Delia was at work or on site. On 3 of the occasions, the camera's angle showed the front door. On those 3, a woman entered using a key. The woman was not someone Delia recognized from the angle and quality of the footage. She did not need to recognize her. The key was sufficient. Her hands did not shake while she exported the clips. Her face was perfectly calm while she organized them by date into a folder she named Fieldwork, which was a term she used for site documentation in her engineering practice, and which struck her, in this moment, as accurate. She made one additional note: the key. Carter had a house key on his personal ring, and a spare she had given him the first year of their marriage for emergencies. There was no third key she had made. She had not lost a key. She had not given a key to anyone. She made a note of this in the document she was building and underlined it once. Then she called Phyllis. Her name was Phyllis, and she was a woman in her mid-50s who specialized in family law and had also, for the last 3 years, handled some of the legal administration of Iris Caldwell's estate on Delia's behalf, which meant she already understood the full shape of what Delia now held and what that signified in the context of a divorce proceeding. Phyllis kept an office in a building downtown that smelled of old carpet and serious work, and she received Delia across a desk covered in annotated folders with the efficiency of someone who had spent decades turning other people's worst weeks into clean, manageable, documented ones. Delia laid everything out: the footage, the key, the texts, the timeline she had already drafted in the same format she used for project timelines: events on the left, dates on the right, a column for documentation status. Phyllis read it without interrupting. She was the kind of attorney who did not fill silence with reassurance, because she understood that silence, in her profession, was where the useful thinking happened. She made notes with a green felt pen on a yellow pad, and then set the pen down and looked at her client. Delia told her what she had seen on Tuesday. She was brief about it. Phyllis made a note and then asked the questions she always asked: the timeline, the joint accounts, any shared debt, any recent financial moves that had seemed unusual. "He asked me 3 weeks ago about the inheritance," Delia said, "specifically about the property values. I told him the estate was still being evaluated." Phyllis looked at her across the desk. "Was it?" "No, it was fully evaluated. I have a complete appraisal package from April. I just didn't share it with him." "Good," Phyllis said simply. "Keep it that way for now." She wrote 2 more notes. "I want to look at the lease agreements for the properties, the ones under Carter's firm." Delia had already pulled them from the management firm's portal the night before and sent them to Phyllis's secure email before going to bed. Phyllis looked at her with the expression of an attorney who appreciates a client who does the next thing before being asked to. 2 of the 11 properties are currently leased by Whitmore Commercial," Delia said. "Carter's firm. Long-term leases, both up for renewal within 14 months. Phyllis set down her pen and looked at the documents on her screen for a long moment. "Your mother structured these leases," she said. "Correctly," Delia said. "Standard commercial terms, no ownership relationship disclosure requirement, because my mother was not in a relationship with the firm. I am now the landlord and my husband is employed by the tenant." "Which gives you," Phyllis said slowly, "a rather significant position with respect to his employer." "It gives me a position with respect to the lease," Delia said. "I don't want to misuse it. I want to be accurate about what exists and what my rights are. The rest of it needs to be handled cleanly." Phyllis nodded once. "We'll be very clean," she said. Real power operated in quiet rooms. A week later, on a Sunday afternoon, Delia drove 40 minutes southeast of Cincinnati to the suburb where her mother's older sister, her Aunt Corinne, had lived for 37 years in a yellow colonial that smelled of cinnamon and old paper, and the particular warmth of a house that has been genuinely lived in. Corinne was 70 and had been Iris Caldwell's closest confidante, and the person who had watched Delia grow from a girl who could already read a blueprint at 9 years old to a woman who designed structures that held up correctly for the people inside them. She made Delia sit at the table, and she made tea, and she listened to the whole account with the particular patience of a woman who has been waiting for some version of this conversation since the day she met Carter at the wedding rehearsal dinner, and felt, without knowing exactly why, that he had looked at her sister's daughter the way a man looks at a useful thing, rather than a beloved one. "I never said anything," Corinne said when Delia finished. "You didn't ask, and you were happy, or you were doing the work of being happy, which is what we do." She wrapped both hands around her teacup. "Your mother said to me once, the summer after you married him, that Carter was the kind of man who read the financial pages every morning and then spent the rest of the day pretending he hadn't. She meant it kindly. She meant he was aware of what things were worth. She just wasn't sure his awareness extended to people." Delia looked at her mother's reading glasses, which she had started carrying in her work bag after the funeral, in the way people carry the objects of people they have lost, not for use, just for proximity. "She trusted the math," Delia said. "She always did," Corinne said, "and so do you." In the 3 weeks that followed, Phyllis's office worked with the patience and specificity of a very good engineering firm, methodically, without rushing, making sure every support was correctly positioned before moving on to the next. Delia's forensic accountant, a man named Vincent, who had been Iris Caldwell's numbers man for 14 years, and who had transferred his loyalty to Delia with the completeness of someone following a structure that had simply changed hands, reviewed the joint financial accounts and found what Phyllis had suspected. Carter had opened a separate savings account 11 months earlier. He had transferred $1,800 to $3,200 per month into it, with irregular timing designed to stay below the threshold of obvious pattern. The total, over 11 months, was $26,400. Vincent also found a charge on Carter's personal card, not the joint card, for a piece of jewelry in the amount of $4,100 purchased 4 months ago at a shop in a neighborhood Delia did not frequent. A gift receipt had not been requested. She documented everything in the folder she had named Iris, after her mother, because it was her mother's knowledge, and her mother's patience, and her mother's precision that was now, quietly and completely, determining the shape of what came next. Delia continued to cook dinner most evenings. She continued to ask Carter about his day in the unhurried way of a woman who has the time for it. He continued to talk about Vivian Cross in the tone she had always noted, slightly elevated, slightly careful. And now she had a name for what the tone was, and it was simpler and less interesting than the months of uncertainty had made it feel. She listened. She was pleasant. She asked one question and let his answer breathe. She cleared the dishes. One evening she made the soup he had always liked, the slow-cooked one his grandmother had made, and he thanked her with something that was genuinely warm, and she accepted the thanks with something that was genuinely kind. Because the ending of a thing and the goodness of a moment inside that thing were not mutually exclusive, and she had always known the difference between a person and a situation. He had no idea she was watching. He had no idea she had ever been watching in this particular way. That was, she thought, the oldest and most reliable form of advantage available to a person who had learned to be still while building something. Tools were meant to work, not shine. The meeting Phyllis had arranged was not in a courtroom. It was not in a lawyer's office. It was in a conference room on the third floor of the building where Iris Caldwell's property management firm maintained its executive suite. A building that Delia now, as the portfolio's primary owner, had the authority to reserve for private meetings, at no cost. She had not had occasion to exercise that authority before. She exercised it now. Carter arrived at 10 in the morning expecting, based on the meeting invitation Phyllis had sent through his attorney, a standard preliminary divorce conference. His attorney, a man named Grant, sat beside him. Delia was already seated when they arrived. Phyllis was beside her. Vincent, the forensic accountant, sat at the end of the table with a stack of binders organized in the way that forensic accountants organize binders, which is to say with a precision that suggests significant and documented unpleasantness is available on short notice. Carter looked at the binders. He looked at Vincent. He looked at Delia. His expression moved from readiness to something more tentative in the way that a structure shifts under an unanticipated load. Not collapse, not yet, but the beginning of the recalculation. Phyllis opened the meeting. She was brisk and warm in the way of people who have managed difficult rooms for a long time. She stated the matter. Dissolution of marriage, grounds of adultery, documented and dated. She placed the doorbell camera footage on the table, printed in stills with timestamps. Carter's attorney looked at them and wrote something on his legal pad. Carter did not look at them. Then Phyllis introduced Vincent, who walked through the account records with the unhurried precision of a man for whom these documents were simply math. He indicated the 11-month transfer pattern. He indicated the $26,400 total. He indicated the jewelry charge. Carter's attorney wrote more things. Carter's expression across the table was the expression of a man who had believed he was operating at a level of subtlety that was not visible, and who was understanding, in real time, that he had been visible the entire time to someone who had not yet decided whether to acknowledge it. Then, Phyllis set the property portfolio document on the table. She explained, in plain language, the structure of the Caldwell estate and its transfer to Delia. She explained the 11 commercial properties. She noted, specifically, the 2 properties currently under long-term lease to Whitmore Commercial Group. She noted that lease renewals were upcoming. She noted that as landlord of both properties, Delia had full authority within the terms of the existing agreements regarding renewal conditions and future tenancy. She did not threaten anything. She stated facts. There was no need to do more than that. The facts were sufficient to make the shape of the situation entirely clear to anyone in the room who was paying attention. Grant, Carter's attorney, asked a clarifying question about the lease structure. Vincent answered it with a binder. Grant reviewed the binder with the expression of a man revising his strategy. He wrote something. He leaned toward Carter and said something low. Carter looked at the table. Carter looked up at Delia. He said, "I didn't know about the properties." "I know," she said. She said it the way she stated an engineering finding, without judgment, without triumph, just accuracy. "You knew about the inheritance in general terms. You didn't ask about the details. That was your choice." He looked at her for a long moment. She could see him looking for the version of this conversation where he still had leverage. She had designed this room the way she designed structures, with no load-bearing wall available to him that had not already been accounted for. "I made mistakes," he said. "You did," she said. "And so did I, probably. But mine are not documented in this binder." She looked at Grant, who had the good professional sense to be studying his legal pad. "Phyllis has the settlement proposal. It's straightforward. I'd encourage you to look at it today." She stood. She gathered her portfolio. She looked at Carter one final time with the quiet, complete attention of a woman who has finished a structural assessment and written the report. "You built things on a foundation you didn't understand," she said. "That's not how you build anything that lasts." She walked out of the conference room. The door closed behind her with a sound that was very small and very final. 11 months later, Delia stood at the window of her new office, a corner suite in a building she now owned in the over-the-Rhine neighborhood of Cincinnati, which she had converted from a long vacant commercial space into a design studio that felt, to the people who worked in it, like a room that had been thought about, rather than simply filled. She had designed the renovation herself, working nights and weekends while the divorce proceeded, because design was the thing that kept her hands and mind aligned in the particular way that doing real work does. And she had needed both to stay aligned. The garden at the old townhouse had been left behind. She had taken the cedar plank from the first raised bed she ever built. One board, worn smooth, stained with 3 seasons of soil and rain, and she had leaned it against the wall of the new office near the drafting table, where it served no practical purpose, and every symbolic one. A man named Theodore, a structural engineer she had worked alongside on a hospital expansion project in the spring, sat at the work table across the room reviewing a set of drawings with the focused quiet of someone who does not mistake noise for intelligence. He was 40, deliberate, and had a quality she had learned to recognize in both structures and people: the capacity to hold weight without showing the strain. He had met Aunt Corinne at a Sunday dinner in July, and Corinne had said to Delia afterward, "He asked about your mother's portfolio because he was genuinely interested, not because he was calculating. I can tell the difference." Delia had taken that under advisement. Carter had separated from Vivian Cross within weeks of the conference room meeting, according to what made its way back to Delia through the small, interconnected world of Cincinnati commercial real estate. He had left Whitmore Group, whether by choice or by the quiet pressure of the circumstances that had accumulated around him was not entirely clear, and Delia did not spend much energy on the distinction. He had taken a position at a smaller firm. He had moved to an apartment in a part of the city he had previously described as not quite where he wanted to be. He had not contested the settlement. The lease renewals for the 2 Whitmore properties had been handled by Phyllis and the management firm with complete professionalism, at market rate, with standard terms. Delia had given no direction other than correctness. Correctness was sufficient. She held her coffee and watched the morning come across the city in the particular way that Cincinnati mornings come: slow, steady, unhurried by what anyone needed from them. She thought about her mother at the kitchen table, with the reading glasses and the lease documents and the casual, weighty way she had said what was true. The surface is just the first coat. It is not where the work is. Delia had always known where the work was. She had simply spent a few years letting someone else decide which parts of her were worth asking about. That season was done. She was unbothered. She was solvent. She was exactly where she had been building toward the entire time. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.